For the final session of today, we are honored to bring together the following panelists to discuss diversity and inclusion in endurance sports. Our goal is to bring together a diverse panel of endurance experts to have a thoughtful discussion about the challenges our sports face as it relates to diversity. We hope that by having an honest conversation about our industry, we can work together to create a more inclusive community for all. Please welcome influential cyclist Yewande Abesida, American racing cyclist Rahsaan Bahati, mental endurance coach Vanessa Forester, paratriathlon head coach Jonathan Riall, and Nike running coach and panel moderator Jes Woods.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Training Peaks Endurance Coaching Summit and our panel discussion on diversity and inclusion in endurance sports. I am Jes Woods, Nike running coach, also Brooklyn Track Club coach and trail and ultra coach here in New York City. Training Peaks asked me to moderate today's panel as a female endurance coach myself, and because I'm blessed to have connections with the beautifully diverse running community in New York, where many leaders in the running community, including myself, are committed to making our sport more inclusive, diverse, and equitable. So before we dive in, some housekeeping items. Since this is such an important topic and important conversation, emphasis on conversation, we have the open chat forum where you can connect with other attendees, share your own experiences and other thoughts on this space. I will be monitoring the questions for the panelists that we'll get to later on in the Q&A section. All right, so let's dive in. As Dirk mentioned, it's no secret that there are few Black, Indigenous, and people of color in endurance sports. If you're looking at sports like Ironman or ultra running, for example, much of the imagery shows that there isn't exactly a large amount of variety and representation. And I think everybody here agrees that we all need to work collectively to change that. So today, we're going to dive into an honest conversation about diversity and endurance sports, the obstacles that minorities face in this space, and then actionable ways to explore meaningful change. So to help us with that conversation, we have an amazing lineup of panelists: Vanessa Faye Forster, Jonathan Riall, Rahsaan Bahati, and Yewande Abesida. So enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to the panelists so that they can introduce themselves. Vanessa, if you want to kick us off and introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. So hello all, my name is Vanessa Faye Forster. I go by the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm based out of beautiful Bozeman, Montana, Big Sky Country. I professionally am a mental endurance coach. I work exclusively and specifically with the mental side of endurance to help athletes reach their highest performance on and off the race course. I have been a long course triathlete for over a decade. I actually entered the sport after I stopped a competitive rowing career in college, and I had no idea what I was doing. I'm also no stranger to being the only or one of very few people of color on start lines, and that's been all over the country and in different distances. I believe that representation begets representation. So I am proud to represent as a female person of color on start lines and also as a Kona qualifier. But for me, it's not just that. It's not my nature to stop there, to simply let my presence speak for me. I'm determined to help change the landscape of triathlon. So that's why I started the Diversified Triathlon movement, which we'll go into later. So that's me. Thank you, Training Peaks, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
See details too soon. Jonathan, how about you next?
Hi, thank you for having me, firstly, and I hope everyone watching tonight gets some good nuggets from such an amazing panel. So I guess from my side, I represent disability sport and Paralympic sport. I'm not disabled myself, but I've been blessed to be able to have a role within Paralympic triathlon in Britain since 2009. I'm a triathlete by heart. I've competed in triathlon since I was 12, and prior to that, I was a young runner, not to any standard by any stretch. And I think for me, coaching has been something that I've just adored from such an early age. I've coached since I was 15. But I've always looked at, I guess, what I have done with a view on how accessible is it. And it's been quite apparent to me that triathlon as a sport is very accessible to one type of person and very inaccessible to lots of others. So we'll come on to it later, but the opportunity in 2009 to try and make a difference to disabled people within the UK was an opportunity that I just couldn't miss. I had no background and no experience, and it's definitely been a learning on the job experience, but been blessed that role has been able to take me to the sport's first Paralympic Games in Rio as our head coach and team leader. But my experience in coaching is across all sectors. So I was head coach of a club, regional academies, and obviously at a British level for our Paralympic team. So hopefully can bring a bit of experience from not just the elite world, but also the world we mostly live in, community sport. So it's me.
I think we're all excited to hear such a different viewpoint today. Rahsaan, how about you next? Or if Rahsaan isn't ready, we're gonna toss it over to Yewande next.
Sure. Hi everyone. My name is Yewande. Thanks, Training Peaks, for having me on this panel. I kind of look at sports through a few different lenses. So I'm based in London, the UK, and I'm currently doing a PhD looking at wearable technology in sports. And then in addition to that, I'm also an athlete and a coach. So I switched over to cycling from rowing 4 years ago, and have spent the past 3.5 years racing, mainly on the track, not seeing people that look like me. I am then also a rowing coach at a club in East London, again, a sport where there aren't that many people that look like me, and that's something I want to change on both sides. And then finally, I'm also an ambassador for two global cycling brands, Tram, who make bike components, and Specialized, who make bikes. That's me.
Awesome. We'll get into the brand piece later with you. Rahsaan, last but not least.
Hey, can you guys hear me now? Awesome. Yeah, my name is Rahsaan, and I've been a cyclist for more than half my life, about 21, 22 years now. And like everyone else on the panel, I found the sport and was shocked that I was the only one out there that looked like myself. And through the years of racing and traveling and being amongst some really cool people and great people, I just had to, make a pivot and realize that I needed to get more people who look like me into the sport. So I started that mission some time ago, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later.
Awesome. So I wanted to start off with the same question for everybody first. I want to get a better understanding of your personal story before we get into some of the actionable recommendations. So same question for everybody. What challenges have you experienced as it pertains to endurance sport, either personally as an athlete or as a coach? So for example, what opportunities were you given or not given? Vanessa, if you want to kick us off again.
Yeah, sure. I have primarily grown up in very affluent areas, so I've been given a lot of opportunity. But I would say my challenge as an athlete since the beginning, since I started in triathlon, has been to continue to create my space and create my sense of belonging, even when my circumstances have changed. So I was born in the South. I attended the University of Georgia. I lived in Atlanta for 1.5 years, and that's where I got my start in triathlon before moving out west. And I was lucky enough to get my start in this place in a city that's primarily more diverse, at least from compared to where I live now and where I moved after that. While we didn't have like an overwhelming high number of diversity in our club 10 years ago, It's definitely more than it is now. And I wasn't the only one at the time. I learned what it meant to feel like I had a place, like I belonged. And I have fought to continue that sense of belonging as I've moved to significantly less diverse areas. So I moved from Atlanta to Georgia, to Denver, Colorado, to Salt Lake City, Utah, to Bozeman, Montana. And those of you that are listening that are in the US, you know that that's a significant change. But all over the course of that time, I've still maintained my passion for the sport and being that representation. And I want to continue to represent so that I can encourage more. And so that's been my primary challenge personally. And then we'll get into how I've used that to create more representation for other people.
Thanks. And Jonathan, same question for you. What are some specific issues that you faced personally?
Yeah, I think, like I said at the beginning, it's a really interesting position to be in as a non-disabled person, but who works in a disability world and at a Paralympic level. I think it's a really interesting transition that I've gone through, because right in the beginning, there wasn't a Paralympic pathway for triathletes, and it was such an exciting period of time, and almost nothing that you couldn't really do anything wrong. So you could provide race opportunities, you could go and upskill coaches, you could go and work in clubs and help to dismiss some of the myths about having disabled athletes within a club setting. You could go and put on races. And obviously my role was blessed to be able to go out and try and identify some people with talent and help them to develop through to a games. But I think actually in terms of the access and the equality side of things, which we're here to talk about tonight, it feels like I'm almost going through that chapter now, because it's very easy, I think, to get things started. It's very easy to create a bit of momentum and to get along a journey. But I think what I'm finding now is the fact that there's a lot more work to do to create something which is sustainable. And I guess that's what we're all here to do, is to try and create something which will outlive us and which has a life of its own. And I would say within disability sport, the profile of Paralympics globally since 2012, I would probably say, has meant that the profile of the best athletes in the world is there, and people therefore think that there is a community that sits behind it. And I would actually say that that's probably not the case yet. And we'll come on to some of the kind of my thoughts around potential actions, but even the fact that I'm here to represent disability probably is an immediate reflection on how disabled people are often treated in society. It's somebody else can do that for you. So I think for me, yeah, the getting stuck in and getting involved in triathlon, which is just what I love to do, was actually the easy bit. The harder bit is how do we keep that moving, and how do we give more opportunities for disabled people to do it themselves, basically.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that later, how to transition from these one-off events into more sustainable change. So Rahsaan, do you want to give us some challenges that you may have experienced?
Yeah, I mean, tons. I started racing bicycles at the age of 12 after finding an after-school program. I grew up in what we call a concrete jungle in Compton, California, where through the grace of God, I found cycling. I wanted to be a football player, and I was really good at baseball and catcher. And at 13 years old, I was still trying to juggle cycling and playing baseball, because I knew in my head that it was a profession, that you can go from playing at a park to playing for a high school to playing at a college to go, like I knew the path, right? There was a path that no one really had to tell you about and educate you. You just saw that path just from growing up in whatever city. And so to that point, it's like cycling doesn't have a path. It was a teacher who introduced me to the sport of cycling. And for what it's worth, I feel like to this day I was bamboozled. I thought he was talking about motorcycles, not cycling. So when I saw cycling, I was very turned off and want to wear tights. So if you could put yourself in my shoes, then an 11, 12-year-old growing up in Compton, like wearing tights is a cool thing. You got to have this macho kind of like demeanor about you just to even walk to and from school, so you're not bullied and whatnot. So like wearing tights is just like out of this world. Fast forwarding, I fell in love with the sport. And my dad gave me an ultimatum. He's like, look, you have to choose a sport. I can't run you across town all year long while you're playing 3 different sports. And for some reason, I chose cycling. And of course, it's taken me a lot of places. And it was when I was on the national team racing in Europe, it finally hit me that, wow, I'm the only black person, not only racing, but there's no black spectators. There's no black people doing anything surrounding the sport. And I vowed literally to go home. This was 2009, and figure out how I can help kids where I came from to get introduced to the sport. And so one of the things that we lack within the inner city is just exposure. And so my first goal was just to expose them to the sport of cycling. And there's so many hurdles that comes with that too, like just the access, the infrastructure, just letting them know that there's more outside of in the Compton area or the Los Angeles area. So yeah, I know that I kind of veered off of your question a little bit, but those are the things I'm passionate about that I know when I was growing up in racing throughout the U.S. and in Europe that I was definitely at a disadvantage just because of the color of my skin. And I knew that I couldn't just have my parents write a check to get me on the national team, which happened often. I literally had to win. You know, it wasn't second, it wasn't third. It was like I had to win. And unfortunately for me, other people, they didn't have to win. You know, they were able to get in other ways for networking. And like I said, writing checks, that's a real thing for to go out and be number one to make it to where I was. So I bring those barriers down and make sure that the kids coming underneath me can also get there by doing all the little things right as well.
I think you are the perfect example of hard work paying off then. So I think we have Yewande left. Any personal experiences or challenges that you've faced before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the discussion?
It was probably harder for me to get into cycling than it was.
I'm not sure if everyone can hear you, Yewande. It might just be me that can't hear you, but it looks like maybe others can't hear you as well. So I'm going to dive into some of the meat and potatoes of the discussion, and if we can get back to you on your personal experiences, we will definitely do that. But I'm going to first start off with Vanessa. I know you're dying to get into some of these details. So question for you. The goal of your diversified triathlon movement is to increase representation in the triathlon space. So can you just give us more information on what you're doing with the diversified triathlon movement, break down how you're accomplishing this with your mentoring program and pairing of athletes with coaches?
Yeah, absolutely. So this first iteration of the diversified triathlon movement actually focused specifically on the coach to athlete relationship. So what I did was I paired 50 athletes, BIPOC athletes, with 25 coaches, all spread across the country, actually the world as well, some in Canada and the Bahamas. And the coaches committed to giving these athletes 3 months of one-on-one guided coaching and support, which is huge because as a newbie, you have so many questions and you need someone to be able to go to and ask those questions. And a lot of times there's this thought that one-on-one coaching is reserved for the elite. So the idea was to change that and also break down that barrier. That was the focus, knowledge and support. And in the year of a pandemic this year and no races, I'm really happy to report that over half of the athletes made it all the way through the program. And a lot of them didn't even get to race. Some of them did virtual duathlons. I was really intentional in keeping it simple, and simple yet actionable, simple yet impactful for this movement. Because sometimes the best ideas don't require us to recreate the wheel or do something that's crazy and different and come out from left field. Sometimes we just have to ask, what's the problem that needs to be solved? What's in my power? And how can I get to work on that today? And that was really the premise for the Diversified Triathlon movement. While DTM focused on that one barrier, the knowledge and support for BIPOC athletes, it also ended up helping in the financial side as well, because there were several companies that stepped up and really made their statement for the BLM movement and wanted to help these athletes. So that was a strategic byproduct that ended up being really fantastic. And then future rounds of DTM will include what you were mentioning, the mentor program, so the athlete to athlete mentor program, with the same filter of it being simple and impactful. But the basic premise was pairing the coaches and athletes together for 3 months of one-on-one triathlon coaching. And then along the way, we also were able to help with gear and other aspects of the financial. And we also are sponsoring the athlete's first triathlon race registration.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like as a coach offering up our services free of charge, I mean, that just feels like an easy way to at least break down the barrier to entry piece. So what are some other grassroots ways that we can help connect people together?
Yeah, just to speak to that first part of the question, it's definitely something that's accessible to most of us as coaches. It's easy, but sometimes we just breeze right over what's easy in favor of making it complicated. And that sometimes is even subconscious. But what happens is we start to make it complicated, and then there's little or no progress made because we just made it into such a big deal in our brains. And we don't know where to start. So first and foremost, whatever the idea is, keeping it simple, it can still be really powerful, is what I want to share first. And then asking questions like, what resources do I have? How can that resource be in support of the mission of diversifying or increasing diversification and inclusion? That was the question I asked myself, because I've been a part of 5 triathlon teams over the last decade. And so I knew people. I could make connections happen in a simple way. So these are the questions we have to be willing to ask, and then be willing to answer the question, even if it doesn't seem like it's going to make the biggest impact for the most people right away. And then the other idea I want to offer is there's something really, really beautiful about seeing, a Black or Indigenous, a person of color at your local track or your local bike shop or running store or any pool, something like that, and sparking up a conversation, just making that connection point, that human to human connection on, what sport are they a part of, how long have they been doing it, and create an invitation to whatever it is that you're involved in, whether it's a program, a group, a triathlon team, a workshop, whatever's happening in the community. Sometimes it's just about creating awareness of what's happening and inviting people in. As I mentioned earlier, representation begets representation. So even if it's just one person, that one person makes it so that another person sees them involved and says, oh, there's someone that looks like me. And it can be that simple. So that's what I would share.
I think that's great advice. Keep it simple, yet actionable. Keep it simple, yet impactful. I think we all get caught up on trying to boil the ocean,
Yeah, I just want to add, there's also, the opportunity to invest in the recreational facilities that are close by. Rahsaan was talking about accessibility, and, that's always an option, but I think the human to human connection piece is often overlooked.
Yeah, I definitely have a friend that once she started showing up to the trail runs, it snowballed into more and more people wanting to try and getting interested in it. So definitely agree with that last point that you made as well. So kind of piggybacking off of keeping it simple before we build it into, maybe more of a foundation. Rahsaan, if you could give us some background on your Bahati Foundation and how you built it from, maybe what it was to the sustainable program that it is today.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I launched the foundation in 2010, and to be honest, I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it. All I knew is that I needed to get more Black kids on bikes, and for whatever it was worth, we just hit the ground running, and it was one of those things where, kind of to Vanessa's point, you don't have to have this big grand, entry. Just start with one kid, and then hopefully that mushrooms into more and more than that exposure. I'll just tell you a small story real quick. I went to Crenshaw High School, which is a predominantly Black school right in LA. They use it for a lot of movies because it's like a hood school, right? And I was featured in LA Times as a 11th grader at that school because I went to Argentina with the U.S. national team, and my classmates saw it in the sports section, and he came to class. He was so excited. And this is not a kid who rode bikes at all. He was a drummer. He was so excited. He kept talking to me about this article, and we got kicked out of class because he wouldn't shut up, and so I was guilty by association. And long story short is that I got him involved in cycling. He then got someone else involved in cycling, and it just continued to snowball. We ended up all going to college. We all became national champions, and this is from a hood school that doesn't even offer cycling whatsoever. So I think that is the testament to exposure over almost anything, you know what I mean? And so that's really what the foundation was about. But now we focus on getting the youth. We just try to inspire them, let them know they can let them know that you don't have to be a bike racer to be a part of this beautiful sport that always take a cool bike with me, like a bike that looks super cool, and then a bike that's like custom painted, and a bike that's aero and whatnot. And I say, look, somebody had to come up with this concept. Someone had to engineer this. Someone had to all of these cool things that make up this bike, and that person could be you. You can go to school for all these things and learn a trade. You don't necessarily have to be a bike racer. Just having representation within the industry is needed because it's lacking. One thing I will say, I don't hate a lot of things. One thing I hate about the cycling industry is that they recycle the same people in and out for years. I've been in the sport for over 21 years, and the same person that was running one program at one company is the same program now at the next company. And it's like, where are those people from 10, 15 years ago that went to school for this and that come from the industry, that have education? They didn't get the opportunity. And so those are the things that I make sure to try to work on to make sure that, they get the same opportunity as everyone else. And so lastly, our big initiative right now is getting kids from the city to the trails. And we partnered with Rebecca out in wherever she is. I forget where she is now, Idaho. So we with Rebecca, partner with Giro. I have a partnership with Giant Bicycles, and we're all trying to get these kids from the inner city to the dirt and let them explore what riding in mountains like, which I believe is beautiful. And hopefully it changes their life forever just to get them out of their bubble and show them that there's a world just like sometimes 20 miles away. And so, yes, that's what we do on a daily. We're constantly fundraising. We're constantly trying to get bigger partners so we can scale this thing even longer. We're celebrating 10 years this year, which is a huge monument for us. I can't believe it's been a decade. And I hope to be around for many more decades and pass what I'm doing, my passion for getting kids on bikes to my kids and so forth and so on. So I hope we'll be around for a long time.
I want to ask you to get into a little bit more detail on how exactly you started working with inner city kids, because I'm seeing some questions come in already. Like, I think it's easy to say, yes, I will partner with youth programs, but how did you see, what?
Some of the first steps we took to partner was just literally going back to where I grew up. So I went back to my middle school where it all started, and started a program there. And the way we scaled it was to you think about impact and like all the so much work. And so the way we can do that is partner with a school district. So we partnered with Los Angeles Unified School District, and we created a program called Adopt a School. And basically we identify a certain grade, which is like third, fourth, fifth grade, by age where I think you can have a positive impact on their outlook on life, and we run them through different programs. Now, I have to be honest, getting with LAUSD is not like you just knock on the door, send an email, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, come on in. It took a lot of legwork. So for those that are interested in perhaps doing something like this, I would say, I think Vanessa even mentioned it, start at your local parks, some sort of after-school program. Get a bunch of your friends to volunteer with a local bicycle club. Go out to the local shop, see what they can do or see what you can do to help them get more kids to come into the shop. It's all about getting them around bikes. I'm out mountain biking right now, jumping off stuff. I've never thought in a million years I'll be a mountain biker. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to get home and figure out how I can get kids to start doing this enduro style racing. So I'm free. You can find me anywhere on social media. If you want to pick my brain about how you can just start with one organization. And again, it doesn't have to be big. Just find that local club. I'll give a shout out to Blackstone Bikes out in Chicago. We partnered with them years ago, and they have such an incredible program where they take kids from the south side of Chicago. They actually teach them a trade with their hands, how to fix a bike. And after they fix that bike, they can either sell that bike for profit or they can keep that bike for transportation. They teach them how to grow vegetables, and they sell it in their market, their farmer's market on the weekend. And these are skills that you're really not getting in a public school. So there's organizations like that all around the U.S. in the inner cities, and sometimes you just have to go to them. You know what I mean? And they would love to have your expertise or just your time, sweat equity.
So starting local, I'm seeing a theme of starting simple and starting local. Thanks, Rahsaan. So definitely pivoting a bit. Jonathan, you mentioned in your introduction that you started off as a club coach. So how did you transition to para triathlon? Like, was it just your desire to bring a bigger bunch of people into the sport, or what was that transition like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been a club coach since 2005. And prior to that, I was a coach at my university. And prior to that, I coached assistant at an athletics club. So it's kind of been around. But in some way, I took a little bit of motivation from my introduction to the sport. So I was from a very working class background, and triathlon was relatively new. So when I went to try to get into the sport, there was virtually no opportunity. And thankfully, a club put on an amazing event, and they give 4 weeks worth of free coaching before the event took place. Well, that was amazing, but it left me with 11 months worth of wanting to do more than there wasn't there. And I think for me, like, I always knew that my desire to be an elite triathlete was only kind of overcome by one thing, which was my desire to be a coach. And I realized very quickly, I guess, what I wanted to try and dedicate the rest of my career to is to making sure that people do have those opportunities, and doing everything that I can to provide them. So I moved from the northeast of England down to Loughborough to work for British Triathlon, and I thought I'd be moving to kind of the mecca of triathlon. There'd be opportunities everywhere, and nobody would be without them. And it was absolutely the opposite. So from a community level, there wasn't a triathlon club. If you were a child, there was no opportunity to get into triathlon. So I just kind of did what I've always done, which is I just started a club, and I brought some coaches around us. And before long, we had a thriving community, which still exists. But I guess for me, from a professional point of view, when the opportunity came up to I guess, create a disability program. The Paralympic side of things was a really lovely opportunity to be able to go and strive for, but it was about creating something at a foundational level. I just jumped at it because ultimately it kind of matched my principles of there is an opportunity lacking and there's something that I can do to try and help fulfill that gap a little bit. So I'll be really honest, it wasn't because I have a background in sort of disability sport or there was something specific, but I just saw a group that were underrepresented and didn't have opportunities, and I had the capacity, I guess, to do something about it. It's the real honest answer.
And I think the real honest truth, maybe from some of us other coaches, is there's definitely a fear to take this on.
Yeah.
So how can we coaches be more open to work with these athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it fairly flippantly. I think it's changed my life for the better. And I would encourage every single coach here to get involved and to find ways to actively encourage people who have a disability to get into sport. You will learn so much about yourself, which will help you to be better coaches for everybody you coach. So I think like disability is just so full of assumptions. And I guess for me, it's the assumptions which are the dangerous bit there, because they make you believe, okay, this person probably can't do that, or they're probably going to be of this standard, or how are they going to fit into this? And you never stop and just ask the person themselves, but probably have to rewind half a step. And I've heard this said already by pretty much everybody on the panel. It has to start with an intention. So I think you have to be really explicit as a coach at a club level that this is something you want to do, because ultimately, and unfortunately, societally at the minute, somebody who is 10 years old, who sits in a wheelchair, is probably not naturally just going to think, I'll go to my local triathlon club, because ultimately, if we don't make it explicit that we are going to make opportunities and we're going to be welcoming and we're going to do everything we can to create a positive experience, it's unlikely to happen. So I think, from where I sit working at British Triathlon, we try incredibly hard to be representative of everybody when we do advertising campaigns about people getting into the sport at a club level. But like was just said before, this can't be at a national level. This has to be community-led, club-led. So I think for me, it just starts with just give it a go and be explicit to people that you want to go on this journey together. I mean, my first day in this role was my first day coaching at a disability level, but the athletes who were there, we went on a journey together and we learned. And just ask people. I think there's the concept which I'm actually, to be honest, only really starting to get my head around now, which is sort of it's a disabling attitude. The person themselves is not disabled if the environment around them doesn't disable them. And I guess as coaches, the thing we all have in common is we just want to help. Like, that's why we do our job. I've not met a coach anywhere who doesn't want to help. But unfortunately, sometimes the easy answer is, well, I'll just help you. There's a set of steps there, or I'll just help you get up them. Or, well, we've set transition out on the grass. Well, that's fine. We'll just push you. Flipping that round, it's kind of, what can we do to create an environment where actually someone in a wheelchair isn't disabled. They're just someone in a wheelchair doing the sport. And more often than not, those things, I talk about this kind of magnification. So I've not really come across an issue within disability sport, which if fixed wouldn't help everybody. So it just, more often than not, it's kind of magnified. You see it quicker. So you talk about a transition area that you could set out on concrete. Well, that's going to help everybody. The experience is going to be better. You create race instructions, which you might do visually as well as audibly, as well as written down. Well, actually, that just helps everybody who has different learning styles. And you just might not normally see it in a non-disabled community. But I would just say, just give it a go. I read a quote today which really kind of stood out for me, which was actually from another equality talk, which I didn't go to, but I saw it on Twitter. And it said, everybody has the right to be mediocre. And I just love that, because I think where disability sport is, people are kind of afraid to use the word disability, and it's almost been replaced by para. But not everybody wants to be a Paralympian. Not everybody wants to be an elite athlete. Not everybody wants to go and compete at a games. What we all want to do is share sport with our friends at a community level. And most people, including myself who do sport, are fairly mediocre at it. I think it's just about creating community, creating opportunities to allow people to get involved at whatever level they want to. But genuinely, trust me, like there's very few things that just can't be got over. And genuinely, as a coach, you learn incredible amounts by thinking differently and overcoming challenges. Give it a go. I'm struggling to hear you, sorry.
I said that you already answered my follow-up question a little bit by spitballing some ideas on, changes that can be made to the environment. But do you have any additional ideas or what needs to be developed to help move this sport forward?
Really, honestly, I think perceptions is probably the one thing that I would say that stands out above the rest. Not all, but we are in a society where most buildings, most swimming pools are accessible. You take, the notion of a car park. Most car parks will have to, by law, have disabled parking. Like, people can access the venues that we train in, but it's the attitudes of the people who are leading those activities. So I would just think carefully about options that you have. It's not about saying that, if you can't include a disabled person because your session's on grass, then you can't run it. We've got to have some common sense to this all. But I just think it's starting with the intention that you can make your activities inclusive to all really, really easily. I think what stands out, I'm kind of privileged enough to work across a whole spectrum of disabilities within our sport. The two areas that do stand out, so wheelchair athletes and visually impaired athletes, are probably the two where I see the sporting landscape be most disabling to them. So again, from a visually impaired point of view, they're going to rely upon a guide to be able to go out and ride a bike on a tandem. And initially that might feel like a barrier that your club can't get over. But the thing that I've just found that's really kind of amazing really is, a lot of people within endurance sports are quite individualistic. It's about them and their journey, or that's what you think. But as soon as you give someone the opportunity to link an individual sport, but with some social elements and team elements that aren't there and aren't offered in standard triathlon, people jump at it, and we're never ever short of people who are wanting to get involved. And not only are they helping, their experience is enhanced because of this as well. So I think the barriers are way fewer than anyone actually kind of really thinks, but perceptions and just letting people come in and help you to kind of change your environment. Let them come in and tell you what needs to be changed. Don't sit with a massive master plan and a strategy about how difficult it's going to be. Some of the assumptions that I've had, insurances comes up all the time. Are we insured to do this? And it's, almost that level of assumption that this is that different to what they normally do. So give it a go and learn, really.
Thanks, Jonathan. So, Yewande, we've heard about what coaches can do and these, small, bite-sized, actionable things. But what we haven't talked about yet are some things that our brand partners can do. You mentioned that you have worked with some brands that are committed to better representation in cycling. Are you able to talk about some of their initiatives?
Yeah, is the sound okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm ambassador for SRAM and Specialized. So I became the SRAM ambassador last year after their ETAP Access campaign, and then Specialized this year. And I guess they've been kind of doing work for a while in terms of supporting people of colour and initiatives that support people of colour. And it's not just something that's happened this year as a result of the whole Black Lives Matter movement that some other brands have just started to pick up on. But they've kind of accepted that they need to do more. Like, they're aware that what they were doing before wasn't enough and that they want to do more. And they've both brands have pledged money to support ambassadors, athletes, initiatives, specialized sponsor a team called Legion, run by Justin Williams, and they've just become a UCI team. They also have their Outride program, which does a lot of community work in the USA. And then there is the WTF cycling industry pledge, which a number of brands have signed up to, which kind of is there to hold them accountable to being more inclusive and diverse as well. That's in the cycling community. Yeah.
Nice. I think it's not only important for us coaches to hold each other accountable and athletes to hold each other accountable, but holding these brands accountable is important as well. So you mentioned that not just cycling, but you used to, or are you still involved in the sport of rowing? Can you talk about some of the things that have worked in rowing that can be translated to other endurance sports?
Yeah, so I started rowing 10 years ago, stopped 4 years ago, but I'm still very much involved as a coach. And I now actually coach at the club where I learned to row. And I got into that through an initiative where the governing body, British Rowing, partnered with the Stewards Charitable Trust to fund the development of coaches across the country in areas of socio-economic deprivation. And so I was lucky to receive one of these scholarships, and it was a 2-year program. And that's also how I ended up doing my PhD as well, but I won't talk too much about that. But with the scholarship, I was provided with everything I needed to become a level 2 rowing coach, and then placed in a rowing club and basically given all the support I needed to try and attract kids to a sport that they might not have discovered otherwise. So I was going into local schools, introducing rowing to them either through machines or being on the water, and then also accessing funding through Sport England to get more kids on the water as well. And I think that's something that worked quite well, just to give kids that opportunity to do something that they'd not done before, because I guess that's kind of how I got into sport. Like, I didn't go to a school where rowing was on offer. It was netball or hockey or basketball, and I was lucky my PE teacher gave me that opportunity to discover the sport. So I was incredibly proud to be part of a program like that. And after those 2 years, I obviously still had the qualifications as a rowing coach, and it was something I really enjoyed, which is why I've continued to do it.
Yeah, so finding these organizations that are funding the development of coaches sounds like, I don't know if it's, specific to rowing, or hopefully we start to see more of these kind of development programs in other endurance sports as well. So final question, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so accessing like funding for sports isn't really, so Sport England and then London Sport and other organizations have quite a few funding opportunities. And through my first cycling club, I was able to access funding to get qualified as a coach in that sport as well. So clubs have the opportunity to apply for some funding, and yeah, try and get more coaches that way. So it's not just a rowing thing.
Yeah, good to hear. So final question, same question for all the panelists. A last chance, any last pieces of advice to the audience today that can help them to begin and implement some meaningful change. We heard about keeping it simple, personal connections, starting local, working on perception, maybe finding some funding. So any other last final actionable insights? We can start off with Vanessa again.
Yeah, I will share something
No
that
pressure,
Alan Lim
if
from
you have any.
I have something. Alan Lim from Scratch Labs shared this with me as I was developing DTM. I've shared what I've shared, and but I would be lying if I said along the way it felt like I didn't have those thoughts of like, this is not big enough, this is not impactful enough, and like I'm just a drop in the bucket. And what Alan told me is, be the drop. Be the drop, because enough drops fill the bucket. And I think that can be true for anyone that has this interest and intention in creating change. Enough drops fill the bucket, and what you choose to do may not change the landscape today, but the future and lasting change that's possible is what we should be looking towards.
Rahsaan, good luck topping that one, but any last minute advice from you? Or Jonathan or Yewande?
I'll jump in incredibly quickly. I think for me, it would just take one step at a time. Don't try to be an expert before you take your first step. None of us are experts. So I just think don't put too many barriers in the way and just commit to being curious and put in the person who you're trying to help absolutely at the center of this. They know what they can do, they know what they can't, and they're going to know what help they need. So one step at a time. Vanessa said it earlier, keep it simple, but just go out with the intention to at least just help one person. And I couldn't agree more. Everybody out there, if they could only help one person, by the time we get to the end of this week, next month, we've already got a community there. So keep it simple.
I'm going to dive into just a couple of... Oh, go ahead, Yewande.
Just to follow on from what I said earlier, I think if you have the opportunity to support the development of a coach that looks like the people you want to introduce to your sport, then you should do that, because adults don't always look at the elite level of sport, and if they have someone closer to home that looks like them, they're more likely to stay and bring more diversity. So yeah, that's what I want to share.
No, that's great. So we're going a little bit over, but I do want to toss out a couple of questions that came in while we were all chatting. So someone asked, as a white male, coming to someone like any of you on the panel to help increase diversity in his running group, how does he do that and come and speak to you without making you out as the spokesperson for people of color?
Who do you want to answer that question? Anybody?
Anybody.
I can answer. Okay, I can just give my 2 cents.
Please.
What I would say is simply just don't expect that person to have all the answers, but that doesn't mean that you can't be curious. And like I mentioned earlier, inviting them to the program without expectations, without an agenda, that's not necessarily pigeonholing that person or making them the token person of color.
Thank you. And Jonathan, maybe for you, someone who is interested in hearing more specifics on how to make the sport of triathlon more affordable and accessible for those with limited financial resources.
Yeah, there's no getting around the fact that just to do triathlon as a non-disabled person is expensive. But I think, like it's been said already on here, there are multiple kind of supportive resources out there who have secondhand equipment. And in the UK especially, and I'm sure this would be replicated in many countries, there is organizations set up normally to support a certain type of disability. So we have wheel power or limb power, British Blind Sport, and they're the people who have expertise in this and usually some ability to purchase equipment which is secondhand or look at funding. But you'd be surprised how easy it is to be able to get started in triathlon without such expensive equipment. So even if you just take the swim and the run as an example, if someone is a wheelchair user, just use your wheelchair. You know, it's kind of, you wouldn't go out and buy a £200 pair of trainers the first time you step out your front door to run. So, and the swim is beautiful because, you know, you get in the water and arguably you're kind of all equal. So even just you take that first step to say, let's get involved in wonderful endurance sport. And yes, if you want to improve, we've got to look at funding and finance, but you'd be surprised by that stage, actually the community itself and how much equipment is out there that people want to swap or sell or bits and pieces like that. Again, take that first step of intention and all of the expensive stuff can come at a later date.
I agree. We get a little too caught up in diving straight into all of the most expensive and greatest things right from the get-go. So for anyone, but maybe Vanessa, for you again, since you work with a lot of coach volunteers in your program, right? Like, how do you keep momentum going and keep momentum committed and these volunteers to continue helping?
Yeah, that was definitely a learning, because I didn't do it perfectly the first time. You know, John said, or we said earlier, like, we don't need to be experts in this. And I definitely have learned that that's a piece of it that needs to be addressed when we have volunteers or anyone that's devoting their time over a long course. I would say what I did well this first round was continue to be in communication, because I played matchmaker. And so if my enthusiasm stays high, then that's reflected in other people. But if we lose the communication, lose the enthusiasm, then people tend to drop off. Everyone's expecting everyone else to carry the energy of it. But for me, as the creator of DTM, I put it on as my responsibility to continue to be enthusiastic, to continue that communication and make it so that they have something that they want to be a part of. They, you know, show them the impact that it's making on the athletes and the community at large that loves what's happening, and have them be a part of something bigger. I think that makes it so that people really want to continue to volunteer and continue to be a part about something bigger than themselves.
Thanks for that. And then final one, maybe for you, Yewande. Someone asked, how do we work on diversity and inclusion when it comes to representation from brands above and beyond simply being ambassadors?
I think it's kind of like an internal process that needs to happen. And hiring someone who is specifically focused on that work, diversity and inclusion, to help the brands understand what they need to do beyond having ambassadors. So paying someone to do the work to make that happen.
So I think we've gone almost an hour now. So I'm going to toss it over to Dirk to wrap things up for us. But thank you guys so much for joining and sharing not only your personal stories and challenges that you've been through, but also all of the meaningful and actionable things that we as coaches can take away to start implementing some change.
Thank you. Great panel. Hope our viewers got some ideas they can take back to their local endurance communities to make some change. Thank you so much. And thanks for joining day one of the 2020 Endurance Coaching Summit. We have a number of small breakout sessions in the breakout theater that are first come, first serve. There will be 2 sessions of 30 minutes each. If you are unable to join the breakouts, we will be recording them and they'll be available to you. The site will be open until November 26th, so you can view any sessions you've missed and continue to network with other attendees. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow with Mike Mikhailovitz kicking it off at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, and his session, The Pumpkin Plan, a simple strategy to grow a remarkable business in any field. Thanks again. Enjoy the breakout sessions.